think we're here today to try and inform as many veterans as we can. We're here with Dr. Bash.
Welcome, Radio Land, TV Land, and YouTube viewers and listeners. This is Dr. Craig Bash. I've been doing veterans medical opinions for 30 years, and I have dozens and dozens of these radio shows which we're going to publish on this YouTube channel, and number 1 through whatever. So thank you for listening, and here we go.
I've been in this business over 42 years. I've never heard the word diminutive process.
Deliberative process privilege.
Process privilege.
Deliberative process privilege.
Yeah.
I never heard either.
It's FOIA.
I've never heard that exact phrase, but here's what I am aware of. There's a term similar to that called work process. Work process. And typically, an attorney might make some notes for himself to review and develop a picture of the case he's working with. That becomes that attorney's work process. The attorney's work process is not subject to disclosure because it's just the attorney's thoughts at the time, and he's entitled to keep his thoughts to himself. That sounds similar to that phrase that you're using, but that does not apply to actual military documents, treatment records, personnel records. Those are not work process, and they're not privileged. Okay, those are treatment records. Those are yours, and you can have them, and no one can deny that.
Well, they won't give them to me. And let me quote real quick here what they're using as the term. It's called the deliberative process privilege under FOIA Exemption 5 parentheses 5 USC 552 parentheses B parentheses 5. It says we are withholding. Let me just read what it says here. It says we are withholding all information which, if disclosed, would fall under the deliberative process privilege under FOIA Exemption 5, and then those numbers I gave you, 552 or USD 552 B5.
All right, I've called that up.
Now, I've been trying to get these records for 47 years. I tried to get them. While I was still on duty.
Have you sought any assistance from Congress?
Yes. Senator Claire McCaskill, which didn't do a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, she couldn't do anything. Her office.
She didn't help me in either.
I didn't hear that.
I said, that's my senator too, and she hadn't helped me any, and I've contacted her office a dozen times.
I have too over the last several years, and she hasn't done it. She sent me a letter telling me she couldn't do anything, basically.
A form letter, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, caller, sometimes you can reproduce your records, besides getting them. Bill knows more, but there's a little rule that says that if the doctor tells you some kind of diagnosis in the service, that during combat, that's something that can sort of be used to replace. Did you get anything like that? Did a doctor tell you what your diagnosis was maybe during service time?
Well, that's the whole problem. If I had the diagnosis from the service on a record, I wouldn't need them.
But verbal, sometimes verbal, he sees you in clinic and tells you what he thinks you have or whatever, just verbally. Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Bash is referring to is 38 U.S.C. 1154B. If you incur a disability during combat while engaged with the enemy, okay?
Right.
you don't need documentation of it. Your sworn statement is sufficient proof that it was incurred in service. Now, whether what you incurred in service is related to what you have today is a medical question for a medical examiner to determine, okay? But if your assertion is it's incurred in service, and you have evidence that it was incurred in combat,
that's the problem.
Statement
that's
is
the
sufficient
problem.
proof. Your statement is sufficient proof of service incurrence. You don't have to have documentation service.
No, what I'm saying is, we're skipping the whole point here. I can't just say, hey, look, I was wounded in combat, I got a disease in Vietnam. I can't just say that and then say, okay, all right then. They want something from the government saying that this took place. Now, if I had something from the government saying this took place, other than my DD-214 showing my service in Vietnam and medals, if I had something other than that, I could see where I could move on. But when all you have is your 214, and then I finally did get my service records from Vietnam. But of course, it's like, 45 years late. 45 years too late. I did get my record.
You are protected in that circumstance, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But what you're telling me now is that you now have evidence that shows you were treated for an illness, I think I heard you say, in Vietnam.
Absolutely.
And you were hospitalized, and it was an infectious disease.
Absolutely. Right.
Okay. Now we have evidence of service incurrence of this infectious disease. Now the next step is what diagnosis do we have today? That's the second step. Actually, it's the first, but anyhow. We have those two. Now what we need is a medical opinion linking the two and saying what we have today is related to what happened in Vietnam because. And that because can seal the case. Now, I'm going to give you some more good news, okay?
All right.
New and material evidence. In order to reopen a claim, you have to have new and material evidence. Now, obviously, if you're denied in the past because there's no evidence of having this infection in Vietnam, and you now present VA with that record, then that's obviously new and material. Now, new and material evidence in the form of service records, when used to reopen the claim, 38 CFR 3.156C specifically states that reopens the original claim. So if reopened and granted based on those records, your original effective date is preserved all the way back.
Well, that's great. If I could just get them to say what the diagnosis was, like for one instance, a systemic blood infection with a undetermined organisms. Now, I don't know if you know what an undetermined organism is, but I don't. And I don't know of many doctors or people. Go ahead.
It just means that it's an infection, but they don't know the specific bug. Okay? Like staph is a common sort of infection. So the staph bug they recognize. But the bug you had is something they're not familiar with. Doesn't mean you didn't have a bug. Just means they don't know which one because they're not familiar with it.
Well, what if you're covered from head to toe in mosquito bites because you didn't have a net down in the delta or repellent, but you're covered in mosquito bites, and you broke out with acne, and you're swelled up, and you got rashes and abdomen pain and a bone pain, that sort of thing.
Well, let's not forget mixing in a little herbicides there too, okay?
Say it again, please.
Jeez. Let's not forget mixing a little herbicides there too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know.
How about
So,
how about diarrhea? Dr. Bash, you have diarrhea?
Yeah.
Diarrhea too?
Yeah. Yeah, I had diarrhea, urinating blood.
Yeah.
Heart,
So
heart was the...
Yes, there's a lot of. This is a medical question now about how this is going to be related. I was at a conference recently where they talk about these diarrheal illnesses and how that sort of breaks down your gut protective membrane, and once that membrane is open, then bacteria can get in through your bowel. It wouldn't normally get there. So you have several. That's why the organism is not known. You have a bowel pathway. You have the mosquito bite pathway. Like Bill says, you got herbicides that are probably causing some skin wounds. So, the exact organism doesn't have to be identified. It just has to be in the medical opinion that was the likely cause.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that opening there in the skin, the mucous membrane, because I did develop an enlarged painful prostate, and now this is at 19 years old, and besides the prostate, let's see, besides that and the other pain and stuff, I developed all kinds of conditions like group A streptococcus with pharyngitis, and they know I had that, but they didn't really treat it. They just didn't give me the care, the antibiotics or whatever I needed. So I got the mosquito bites.
These organisms, these organisms can be difficult. Like there's a case maybe Bill and I worked on years ago where the guy stepped on a stick, those sharpened sticks that went through his boot.
Bungee stick.
Yeah, sharpened stick went through his boot, and it carried with it a little bit of material, and then like 40 years later, it pussed out from that, that fungus that was just sitting there. So these things can be around for a long time, be dormant, and we don't necessarily know what the exact organism is. So let's look at the whole case. But it sounds like you're on pretty good ground with some legal things, and if we could look at the medical part of it, we might be able to get you a good medical opinion and try and link it together.
Yes, and in the interim, while we were discussing things, I looked up 38 U.S.C. 552b5 to try to understand this.
Okay.
And that does not apply to your service records, okay? And that paragraph, and I'm quoting the paragraph. It says, and basically this is a list of exceptions that are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. Okay? Now here's B5. Interagency or intra-agency memorandums or letters that would not be available by law to a party other than an agency in litigation with the agency, provided that the deliberative process privilege shall not apply to records created 25 years or more before the date on which the records were requested. So, in your case, this section clearly does not apply because, number one, you're not asking for inter or intra-agencies memorandums or letters. You're not asking for that. You're asking for your own personnel or medical files.
Right.
Not asking for interagency or intra-agency memorandums or letters. And secondly, the records were created more than 25 years ago.
Right.
So this section does not apply.
Exactly.
So you're gonna need some help if you're gonna need some representation that's gonna enable you to overcome this.
You see, now that you're saying exactly what I've kind of been what I told them. I told them, why would you still withhold my records 45, 47 years later when the whole world knows about Agent Orange and all that stuff? Why would you still be withholding my records?
Yeah.
And they basically just... Go ahead.
Understand,
I'm sorry.
this section was created to allow agents of the government to be able to freely to discuss things in memorandums or letters without fear of what they're saying. In other words,
Right.
it would have a chilling effect. If, let's say, I wanted to talk to another rater or decision review officer and say, well, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? And we get discussing things, okay?
Yeah, I know
That's
exactly
not
what you're
subject
saying.
to the Freedom of Information Act. That's not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And so that's not what you're asking for at all. That's not at all what you're asking for.
No, it's not.
So if it takes an attorney to file a proceeding to get it, then do it. You know?
Yeah, that's where I'm at, I guess. That's what it's finally come down to. And I'm going to file my notice of appeal. What's that?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just gotten to that point. I've tried for the last 5 years just to deal with the VA and say, hey, look, I'm just trying to get, due compensation. Go ahead.
Are you
Dr.
doing this
Basher.
on your own?
Well, you know what? I kind of hate to get into that. No, I'm not on my own. I'm using VFW, and before that it was DAV, but to put it mildly, I caught them lying to me, and they trashed my claims. And it took me 5 months to get my claim into the system after I had to refile. So I dumped DAV for that reason, for withholding, or not for withholding, but for kind of lying to me. You can fibbing. Let's say they fibbed to me pretty heavy. I used. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, Dr. Basher, you may have, even without getting those last bits of your record, you may have enough in there now with a good medical opinion to move it forward.
Yeah.
You do simultaneous.
Yeah, I know. It's just that I'm kind of at the end of life here, and it's been I'm 67 now, and this happened when I was 19, and it's just been a long time, and I finally did get service connected, but that's all happened within the last couple of years because they wouldn't give me any medical records whatsoever until 2015. Oh, except for one. I did get the one when I got out of the military, and that was my P3 profile on DA 3349 for my physical capacity and stamina.
Mm-hmm.
I had a permanent profile, and they knew that, so they withheld my records all these years because of that. And, so I don't understand. It's documented that I had these conditions. I was non-deployable, medically unfit to be deployed. I've got these, all these physical conditions, mosquito bites. I was in Vietnam. I was broke out, swelled up, joint pains, abdomen pain. I finally wound up in a coma about 2 months after discharge. Things like that. The group A streptococcus with pharyngitis. And it just went on and on. The prostate problem. I still got BPH. Just one thing after another. And they just don't seem to hear me. So I guess I need a group of attorneys to speak up for me. I need a firm or two.
Yeah. You're going to need some heavy hitters. You're going to need some heavy hitters, my friend.
I know you guys have other callers waiting, and I don't want to tie anything up, and I appreciate the time you spent with me, but I think I know where I stand, and I'm going to file that tomorrow and then look for an attorney.
Good. And I thank you for the call.
Well, thank you very much
for all that. Thank you for all that hardship you've endured.
Batch, you and Bill want to give him your contact numbers, and maybe he can contact you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to take your number.
Yeah, you get the bill through me, but I'm drbash@doctor.com is my email, and then Skip. I got a guy named Skip who does my scheduling, which is a good way to call him and set you up a half-hour conversation. And he's at 925-381-7561. And I'm glad you called in because each patient's case is, the most important case in the world, but it also brings up issues that apply to a lot of other people. So there's no hurry to move on to anybody else. But those old infections from Vietnam are pretty common. So I think if you're, that you have a good case.
Yeah, and it's getting worse for everybody, and we're getting older. And like the other day, I had a tooth pulled, and some of my jaw came out with it. So the bone degeneration is taking a toll, and so and the heart's ready to go and all that kind of stuff. But they need to be more accurate on the rating, because these raters, they will look at your records and say, you weren't treated for this condition, you weren't diagnosed with this condition, and it didn't occur in the service. But yet I'll be holding that same record in my hand looking at it. And they say it didn't.
Yeah.
The record don't even exist. It's things like that that give the VA a bad name.
It does. And I would attribute that to the need for speed. There are so many cases, and the quotas are on those raters to get those cases out in extraordinary numbers. And so they're taking too many shortcuts. And you need to be able to work thoroughly and quickly, not just quickly.
I totally agree, 100%.
The other thing you can't realize how people make this seem trivial, but it's difficult. Bill's been at this for 40 plus years, and I've got a lot of medical training, and these cases, they take all my training skills to work them through, and the poor rater has to deal with the law and also try to deal with the medicine. It's a difficult task.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know it is, but when you've got a current diagnosis of coronary heart disease, and you've got, from your surgeon, and you have a 100% blocked carotid artery, can't be operated on, you've had a handful of strokes, and you apply for unemployability and you can't get it, it's just frustrating. And then you can't get your records to prove your service connection. That just piles on top of it. So guys do things they shouldn't do.
I agree.
Well,
yeah. And one thing I do want to make sure of right now, since you brought it up, and you don't have to tell anybody, but you set foot in Vietnam, and you have heart disease. Ergo, you're presumed to be service-connected for heart disease, and it's just a question of evaluating the heart, not service-connecting the heart, I hope.
Right. Well, like I say, I finally did get service connection, but at 30%. But I go to the mailbox, 100 feet away, wasn't even that, and I'm out of breath. But it's just a lot of things that when you combine them all, like the brain tumors and stuff like that, it's problematic.
Mercy.
And it's a bad situation. And when this, I know they're sitting on the evidence, and that's why they won't release it. They've got the evidence I need, and I have needed for 100% back in 1971, and they won't let me have it. But I am going to get some attorneys, as many as it takes and whatever it takes, because I'm going to get this out to the public.
Good.
Guys are dying because of this, and it shouldn't be that way. Well, thank you very much for your time and trouble. I really do appreciate it, and your information. And I've got your number, and I'll be in contact.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for calling in.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bill, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I'm running across a term here on habit. By the way, I was reading some stuff, and it's called malingering. Are you familiar with that term?
Sure.
Okay. Now, the way I've read it, I've done some research on it. The VA's quit using that term, and in place of it, they use undiagnosable. Do you know of any other terms that they might use?
Sure. Sometimes they might describe a condition as functional. That's a buzzword, okay?
Functional.
Functional, yeah. It was used in the past to say, well, he doesn't have a disability. The veteran doesn't have a disability. They might have a functional vision problem or a undiagnosable back problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Now those would be distinct and different from the word malingering, because malingering is intentional.
Yes.
Malingering is faking symptoms in order to gain benefits. That's malingering. Or to avoid duty. That's malingering. But just because you don't have a diagnosis, or just because you have a functional degree of impairment for a reason we don't yet understand, that's not necessarily the same thing as malingering. That's
well,
not quite right.
I looked that up and I think it was on Google or whatever, but they had it undiagnosable in there with it as the example of another term the VA may use, meaning the same vein as malingering. I understand that they very well could be quite different.
Yes, they are.
They know something's wrong with you, but they can't diagnose it, you know.
Well, of course, Congress protected Persian Gulf vets by allowing compensation for undiagnosed illness. We see the veteran has manifestations, symptoms, okay, but we don't have a diagnosis to explain it. Well, if that follows service in the Persian Gulf War, you get compensated for it. Okay? That's...
Am I still connected?
Actually, yeah. It's like in my experience,
yeah.
I get
In
a lot
fact,
of veterans
there was a decision in July, and it's rather important. For most of history, pain was defined by VA as not a disability.
Thank you all for listening. That ends this show, and now I'm going to zoom off.